Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg making that shocking revelation this week about Facebook's suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story right before the 2020 presidential election.
Apparently, the FBI gave a specific request to Facebook to de-escalate that particular story. In fact, Twitter stopped the story altogether.
There was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post.
Had that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. Basically the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. We thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that, so just be vigilant.
Now, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the same FBI that started Crossfire Hurricane, then goes, because they don't want political interference, but in 2020, they don't mind going to tell Facebook and Twitter, hey, we think this whole Hunter Biden thing is Russian disinformation, so kill the story. So ask yourself this question. Why is the Federal Bureau of Investigation doing this? Why are they interfering with elections? Then when they made this whole thing about we're not going to interfere with elections, which is precisely what they did.
The FBI coercing Facebook to censor information is a direct violation of the First Amendment. And the agency, according to Mark Zuckerberg, interfered in the 2020 election, just as they interfered after the 2016 election via James Comey, who was the FBI director at the time, buying into all those contents of the Steele dossier that ultimately launched the Russia collusion investigation.
And look, here's what you got to give it up to Mark Zuckerberg for. As much as I don't like necessarily their actions, I think he's being honest.
Yeah.
He told you how it works. We have 4 million people on our Facebook page, let's say on Jay Sekulo's page. We know, we see the viewership go up and down. We know there are words we do not put in titles. We do not put on our social media posts because they don't reach as many people. But it's all up to our social media team to figure out that game. What I liked about this is that Mark Zuckerberg just went out on Front Street and said, you want to know how it works? Here's how it works. The FBI called us, said this story is coming. A bunch of stories are coming. We think it's Russian disinformation. Do something about it. And they said, fine, we'll just leave it up to where people could share it, but no one will ever see it.
Keep in mind, the FBI had Hunter Biden's laptop when they said that. They've had it since 2019. So when the FBI told Facebook that on the eve of a presidential election, they knew it was a lie. They interfered in the last presidential election. If ever there was an attack on democracy, it's the country's largest law enforcement agency weighing in a dishonest way.
You had the FBI go to news agencies, which these social media platforms are, right, during an election, say, don't run this story. I mean, think about that for a moment.
The former president has now taken his first legal action to challenge that FBI search at Mar-a-Lago.
In federal court on Monday, Trump filed to halt the Justice Department's review of the material seized in the search, requesting a special master.
Here's the problem. So the FBI executes the search warrant after the judge signs off on a finding probable cause. And that's the procedure that's followed. Then you would immediately, this is what you would normally do, you would immediately challenge the review of the documents by the FBI, because they do what's called a taint team.
There's supposed to be like a wall between the investigating attorneys, and they're supposed to be kind of neutral and look through things like privileged documents and not taint the investigation.
Here, when you have this taint team, that's the FBI reviewing the FBI's own seizure. Now, it's another group of FBI lawyers and agents, but still the FBI's looking at it. A special master says this all goes to a judge, and that judge will make the determination independent of the FBI. But that's something you normally go in and ask for immediately. You don't wait 2 weeks. So I'm sure there must be some reason for this, but the problem is it could actually be moot, because I can't imagine that the FBI hasn't reviewed this immediately.
It probably should have been made, the request, a couple weeks ago, shortly after the search was made, because for all we know, DOJ's already going through that information. But this is not an unusual request, and I think it's fairly well grounded.
Now, the second part about it is there's a Fourth Amendment issue raised. The problem is the warrant, which we have a copy of, really broad.
This is not just about President Trump. This is about the Fourth Amendment. This is about the executive branch of government. This is about whether the Espionage Act even should apply at all to a former president under these circumstances.
This is unprecedented in U.S. history. So it deserves the time we're giving it, because this has never happened before. No former president has had their offices and home searched by the FBI, authorized by the current administration's Department of Justice, against basically a political opponent. I mean, could you imagine if Donald Trump did this to Joe Biden? What people would be saying?
President Biden's historic decision on student loans. The measure could affect up to 43 million Americans, including many who have been carrying this debt for decades. However, not everyone is celebrating the president's decision.
The right thought it was bad. The left thought it was not near enough. It didn't impact enough people. And some on the left said it's not fair to others. But this is mostly politics right now, right?
They're seeing a blowout in November, so they're trying to do everything they can. They're spending like crazy, and I don't blame them for trying. I think the Republicans right now have to get very focused on beating back some of these bad ideas. And it's not good enough just to say, don't do it. But you have to talk about why it's bad for individuals who make more than the $125,000.
87% of the people in this country don't have student debt. So they're going to subsidize the 13% who do, and the 87% who don't have student loan debt are going to pay for it in the form of maybe higher taxes down the road. Obviously, there's putting it on the debt right now, but they're also going to pay for it in the form of higher inflation.
I mean, if you're on a conservative side right now, it is the talking point. And I think maybe slightly unfairly, everyone kind of is bumper stickery when it comes to it. I hate that when you're just like, everyone kind of says the same thing and they say, oh, it's just you got to pay back the loans. I understand that. I believe you should. That doesn't stop the conversation that I believe a lot of these loans and these situations that happen were not necessarily on the up and up. And I think a lot of people got taken advantage of. Yeah. So let's not forget that part of the story. There are a lot of kids and families and parents who got taken advantage of. And no, I do think we are having a mass exodus from higher education for probably a positive overall of it being the only option you have is to go to college. No one wants to be hit with a bill, essentially, to pay off other people's liberal arts degrees.
And what's weird is that these Democratic members are applauding their own institutional obsolescence. I mean, they are all giving these accolades to the president for circumventing Congress because he knows he couldn't get this through Congress.
Though I have sympathy for the fact that a lot of people got really taken advantage of, and I think there is solutions, hopefully, to that. This way isn't it. It can't always be, you messed up, now it's not just the government pays for it, because what that means is that you have to pay for it.
A federal judge put a pause on part of Idaho's near-total abortion ban hours before it was supposed to go into effect.
As we expected was going to happen, we're going to start seeing a series of judicial rulings in what I call the post-Dobbs world, which is where we live right now. This is after the Supreme Court decision saying that Roe versus Wade was no longer the law of the land. There would start to be decisions being taken in state courts. So groups like Planned Parenthood and other pro-abortion groups weren't going to take this sitting down, obviously.
Idaho's near-total abortion ban says every person who performs or attempts to perform an abortion commits the crime of criminal abortion. It allows for few exceptions in cases of incest or rape reported to law enforcement, or where the doctor determined in good faith an abortion was necessary to prevent the death of the pregnant woman. The U.S. Department of Justice claims that last clause, the death of the pregnant woman, is too narrow and violates the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act.
Don't just assume that you live in a red state, you have, a conservative legislature. You might not have a conservative judiciary. And that's where a lot of these cases are going, and that's who's making these decisions at this time.
The DOJ lawsuit hinges on the fact Idaho's law provides no exception for the health of the mother, only her imminent death. In Wednesday's ruling, U.S. District Judge Lynn Windmill agreed and put a pause on just that part of Idaho's trigger law until the lawsuit runs its course through the courts.
That's what the judge said. He said this court is not grappling with the larger, more profound question. Rather, the court is called upon to address a far more modest issue, whether Idaho's criminal abortion statute conflicts with a small but important corner of federal legislation. And he says it does. Now, the federal legislation they're talking about, Cece, is the Emergency Act.
Yeah,
so
right.
Explain that to people, what we're talking about there.
So this is the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, and this is what the judge is saying. This is going to trump. What's very interesting is he quotes the language of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act almost exactly. Here's what the language actually says, that a medical emergency is one that places the health of the individual, or with respect to a pregnant woman, the health of the woman or her unborn child in serious jeopardy. So the actual language of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act actually protects the unborn child's life from being placed in serious jeopardy. He clearly, in his opinion, leaves that one point out.
Yeah.
He just talks about the health of the woman in serious jeopardy, not of her unborn child. So even an argument can be made, even under the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, that protects the life of the unborn child.
So we're having to do this state by state, but I'm going to tell you, Idaho, South Dakota, of course, Texas, we are fully engaged. The resources of the ACLJ are being deployed to fight these on a state-by-state level, and it is important that the Dobbs Club of Roe versus Wade is now removed from this process.